Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of The Only Way is Ethics. I'd like to welcome Lyndon Johnson to the episode. Lyndon, thank you ever so much for taking the time and welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on board.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Got loads to talk about. I've been really looking forward to this one, Lyndon. You probably know the format of the podcast. What I'll do is I'll hand over to you, so you can give us some insights, Lyndon, into your journey into digital health, bit about your clinical background as well, which would be great, and how you got to where you are now.
It's a good question, Dean. Hello, everybody. Lyndon Johnson. I am one of the co-founders and the chief executive of Eightfold Governance. I've been working digital health, maybe 7 or 8 years now, I think, and trained as a clinician. I'm a registered nurse and have been since 1998. Background in emergency departments, ITU, air ambulances, expedition medicine, all fun stuff like that. Difficult. And then senior management in the NHS. So how did I find my way to digital health? So I started my career as in commercial sales. I had a successful sales career to the age of 25. Worked in London and South Africa, mainly in selling computer data media and IT. And actually, I found myself in South Africa in a condo. I had the whole thing, the condo and the sports car and everything else. And the flat that I had in South Africa looked out over Alexandra Township. Right? So literally, I was in this kind of condo with a security fence and a guy on the gate with a gun. And on the other side of the valley were kind of tin shacks, and I found myself kind of looking out and thinking, how did I end up here? And I kind of fell into sales. I wasn't particularly motivated by money. I'd been traveling and needed to earn a couple of bob, and literally got a sales job out of the job centre, and it turned out I was quite good at it. That I think is largely, sales is like anything; it's all about communication, right? So
Totally.
found myself in this kind of odd situation, and then thought, there's a bit more to this. And I wouldn't say I found it too easy, but I was making a lot of money, but it didn't feel like it was particularly useful to society, I would say, particularly being in South Africa in that time. That's around 1995, I guess.
Right.
So country trying to get on its feet. People like me that come from London knew how to sell, knew what to do, and I don't know. Anyway, I had a kind of, I wouldn't say I had an epiphany, but I remember very particularly sitting on that balcony and thinking, I've got a bit more to offer than this. And I remember I went to the guy that was running the company and said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go back to the UK. Maybe I do some corporate fundraising for charities. I don't know, but this isn't for me. And I remember him literally saying to me, "What do you want to do that for? Have you seen my BMW outside?" And I thought, because I don't want to be, that's not it. So, long story short, I made my way back to the UK. I did work for charities for a while, which is just as cutthroat.
Okay.
And I really oddly applied for and took a job looking after adults with learning difficulties. So I went from the condo and the sports car in Johannesburg to the minibus in Bristol. It was great. I loved it. It was really humbling. I really enjoyed the people I was looking after, mainly adults with a range of learning difficulties of different severities. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I should do it properly, and explored, what does that look like, and nursing. And I initially joined to train as a nurse in learning difficulties, and quite quickly swapped to mental health, and then for a range of reasons. Mental health wasn't for me, but I remember they sent me on a placement to an emergency department. I was like, oh, this is it.
Wow.
Flashing lights and bit of drama, just like it was on telly and everything else. It was great. So that's how I found my way. Well, it's kind of odd, really, isn't it? Because I went from commercial sales to nursing, and then I did that for maybe 10, 15 years. A&E, ITU, air ambulances, expedition medicine, and then kind of inevitably senior management, which in the NHS, I mean, I just found very, very hard. I found it very difficult to make stuff happen. Felt like I was pushing rocks up hills all the time. And by the time I came out, actually, so how did I get to digital health? When I was running musculoskeletal and community services in Sussex, I had a company called Patients Know Best come and pitch to me, and they were young then. There was maybe, I think there was 3 or 4 employees. I don't think they had much of a runway in terms of funding. I don't think they signed many deals, but they pitched me this idea about democratizing data and putting the patients in control of their records. And as you know, Dean, in our game, knowing as much as possible about the people that are in front of you counts for a lot.
Yeah, totally.
And so I was just sold. I mean, I like the company, and Mo from PKB, lovely bloke. But it was the concept that really kind of switched me on. I was just obsessed with it. I was like, hang on a minute. So if you give the data to the people and it's in their phone and they can just go like that and show me their record, I don't have to rifle through people's handbags in A&E. I don't have to guess when I'm giving somebody a drug or, whatever it may be. It counts for a lot, particularly in emergency medicine. And I thought I didn't want to go and sell it, but I wrote to the company and I was like, look, I just got to come sell this thing for you. I used to be good at selling, and I have to say, by that point in my NHS career, I wouldn't say I felt broken, but I think senior management in the NHS, it's gluey, and I wasn't quite sure how much of that old, person was left.
Yeah.
And I also knew coming out into an early stage startup with not much of a runway, I was going to sink or swim. I was going to get found out pretty quick if I couldn't deliver, I suppose. But it was one of the best moves I ever made, actually. So to me, it felt like it solved lots of managerial problems, lots of clinical problems, very good for the patient, something I could really get behind. And so I went to work for them as a commercial lead. So that was my first step into digital health. I talk a lot, Dean, like you. So do you want me to pause?
All right. No, yeah. I mean, that probably that's amazing, Lyndon. Your story, and I suppose it's one that I haven't seen yet. We haven't seen yet on the podcast. Someone coming from most of the clinicians have been doing that since the start of their sort of like careers, and have come through as sort of like nurses, doctors, pharmacists, physios, etc. And then, but I think we've all got something in common. We've sort of, I wouldn't say fell into digital health, but it's never on a clinician's journey, is it? Like sort of, someone says to you, oh, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to work in digital health. Don't even know what it is a lot of the time, do we? Sort of like, it's like, what is this thing? It's like sort of, and you saying about sort of that whole access to data, because at the moment, isn't it? That's what it's all about. It's all about sort of, mobilizing the data in relation to sort of like digital health. And I think a lot of us have this sort of like, I use something called DM Nurse that was a McKesson product, and we used to put all our care plan in it. And when someone showed me it, I said, what, you put your care plans in there? And they're like, yeah, you put them in there, and they stay in there. Yeah, they stay in there. We use them, and we put all our nursing notes in there. And I was just like, wow. It was just like sort of, it was just like sort of, just enabling us to sort of like have something that sort of like to manage care more effectively in relation to that. So from there, so you had this sort of like this journey into sort of like realization, and then sort of like Patient Know Best, which and great start at the start of their journey as well, because as we know, they're tiny little company, aren't they? They're not in anywhere, but they're actually, it's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? And the journey they've been on, and you're at the start of that journey. So how did that then progress from sort of Patient Know Best at the start, and that into sort of like that eightfold?
Where that went to, yeah.
Yeah. I was just
Yeah, I mean, just to your point on, these ideas and how we come across digital health. I mean, the thing, the bit that kind of really resonated with me about PKB and the significant problems I was having managing musculoskeletal services. So if I'll give you an example, you know, we were coming across people that had had scans, and were having problems, you know, that they needed urgent care and they needed to respond, and the system needed to respond to those scans quite quickly. But the system that the NHS has created, and it's a system trying to do its best as it can as a system, but it's a very, very patriarchal system where the patients have to kind of come cap in hand and, ask us as clinicians or nurses and the doctors and the system itself, to do stuff for it. And it was that really kind of floated my boat, which was the kind of,
I was just
if we've got our bank accounts, we've got our airport tickets, we've got our train tickets. People are very good at organising themselves if they have the tools to be able to organise themselves. And it was that and the concept of, the patients own their data and they should be able to access their data in a timely way. So, where did I go from there? I mean, I had a strong driver. I would say, even before I was a salesman. There's nothing wrong with being a salesman. It's a bit of a dirty word, isn't it? But being in service to society, or looking at the bigger picture, that was always very important to me. So that's what made me gravitate towards a company like that. I think they were aspiring B Corp at the time, and I worked for them for quite a long time, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot what it was to be, bootstrapping, and starting with, not an awful lot of funding and not an awful lot of clarity, and selling ideas. I mean, I if there's one thing I do naturally, it's like get hold of good ideas and I talk very excitedly about them, ad nauseum. Sometimes I can see people kind of withering. Oh no, it's Lyndon with another great idea. But I stayed with them maybe 4 or 5 years. I think I helped sign
right.
some
Yeah,
decent sized deals. Enjoyed being in front of GPs, trying to explain why patients should be able to access their blood results at the same time the GPs could. A fair amount of sucking the teeth. They go, you've not met my patients. They shouldn't be able to access
yeah,
their data. That whole kind of thing. But I learned a lot about business, I would say, and a lot about information governance, really, because even though, I was there to effectively help secure deals for software product, there was a lot of complicated conversations about, who owns the data, how do they access the data, different models of accessing data, cybersecurity, how's that data encrypted? Is it encrypted in transit? What should happen to it? And because I was quite strident about the value of this thing, it was quite easy to get my head around quite complex topics and then find solutions as we kind of went through them. So yeah, I stayed with them 4 or 5 years. I'm just trying to think what happened next. So it kind of got to the point where I felt like I I delivered what I could deliver, if you like.
yeah,
I like shiny stuff. I'm I have the way that my mind works is fairly entrepreneurial, and I sometimes find it quite hard to focus on stuff when it gets to kind of business as usual, as it were. Um, and I felt the company, I'd taken the company as far as I could with what I had to offer, and I needed to learn elsewhere. So I went to work for a couple of other companies. I worked for a company called Medipad that became Humour. I wasn't there particularly
yeah.
long, but it was interesting to be in a company that had taken an awful lot of money in terms of funding, and the very different feel to try and go very fast with an awful lot of money. But the which led me into kind of solo consultancy, really. At that point I was kind of like, I should be striking out on my own here, and so I
Yeah.
started with a company I still have as a holding company called Eightfold Health, supporting early stage startups with their commercial offer. So the kind of niche where that I was working in was, you've had some pilots, you've done some deals, you're now ready to sign your big multi-year, multi-million-pound regional contract. And I started supporting a number of companies in that space. And, you know, I guess through doing that, that was a big part of the journey toward founding Eightfold Governance. Reason being, I mean, I won't mention the company's name, but I was at the point of transacting a really kind of company-making contract, really big-scaled multi-year contract for this company. And I'd asked the founders, you know, we're at the point, we're on our way here. The contract's going to be coming up for signature and so on. There'll be some due diligence on it. You know, are we good on the governance, right? You've got your various pieces of governance and aspects of governance in place. Oh yes, we've got that. They didn't, you know, and it was that kind of money that comes through the chest toward the end of the financial year, where the deal, you know the sort, right? You know the G or the PCT or the ICS or whatever they are, say, oh, we've got some money that it's going to go back to the middle unless we do something interesting with it. And this was the interesting thing that they were going to do with it. And of course, by the time this company got its act together, because they were way behind the curve, and as you and I know, when you try and pull the trigger on that stuff quickly, you know, it's months away getting it into a format. So by the time they got their house in order, the deal had moved on. So the NHS had spent the money elsewhere. I lost a lot of money on commission, but what I cared about more is the company had real value to offer, right? I mean, to society, to the patients, they worked very hard to build what they had. I really liked what they had. The NHS very much wanted what they had, and the deal went south. You know, and the company not long afterwards got sold, and you know, it was a pivotal moment, I would say.
Yeah.
And so as I was going through this process, really struck me. So in my travels for PKB and with this company, I came across Adam Spinks, who's my co-founder, and at the time he was DPO for one of the ICSs in the south of England. And I said to him, you know, the thing that these companies are really struggling with, these companies that have got real value to society and to the patient, what they're struggling with is the ability to know how to interact and what they need to have lined up to be able to execute contracts with what at the time was the major client, which was the NHS. And I didn't know Adam particularly well, but you know, when you're kind of traveling through this world, you know, you come across people who are can do. He was not lots of upset the IG community right now.
No, you go for it.
Sometimes IG can be perceived as, how many ways can I say no? And this guy was not that. He was, you can't do it that way, but we can find a way to do it, and it looks a bit like this. And I was like, that's interesting. I've not met many people like you. And the poor bloke, you know, I went to him and I said, look, we should be starting a company that offers high quality governance services to companies that are trying to interact with the NHS, because we know everything about that side of the fence. We know, we're pretty good. Both of us have been around the track and fairly long. Well, I'm longer in the tooth than he is. But, you know, we can spot a winner. And I don't mean commercially, I mean companies that can deliver value. You know, and I think they need our help. And he kind of said, you know, what's there to lose? Let's give it a go. And that's how it started, really. And, you know, we've kind of built on it ever since. But yeah, so to your question, that's how I got from sales through my first interest in digital health through a super, you know, focused, difficult world of IG, to starting a business because I felt it was in service to, you know, the NHS and the companies and society at large.
And it's pretty organic, isn't it? In that sort of like, you know, that growth and sort of like, you know, and the need, and like I think we all have those sort of like, you know, you meeting Adam, and I like obviously I've met Adam. He's absolutely great and he's absolutely bonkers at the same time, but he's just like brilliant and really knows his stuff. That whole, you know, you talk about the readiness of organisations, and you know that story you've just said, and unfortunately, as we know, Lyndon, We see it quite a lot, don't we? Where you get organisations coming into digital health, and I think for me, one of the reasons that I do what I do, and we support sort of like these organisations is really so they is to help them get it right and to help them to get on the right path in relation to what they're doing, and to support them on that journey, because you don't want them getting it wrong. And we see organisations with all different attitudes, don't we, around how they think they're going to approach it and what they think they need to do, etc., and stuff like that. But as I've said to some organisations before, you're not developing video games. It's digital health technologies that can potentially harm or unfortunately, relate to, could kill people if sort of like, inappropriately used, or at fault. Which leads us on to, it's like I'm not going to get very dark in relation to this, and we start getting into the doldrums, but it's the realism of that. And I mean, we are in the space of regulatory compliance and that whole governance piece. And I'd like to sort of start off sort of like having a chat sort of around that. And I suppose it's something that I haven't done before on the podcast. Is sort of normally it's like bang straight in clinical risk management and sort of like in there. But I'd like to sit sort of like on the peripheries, especially around sort of like, your experiences with, like, say, organisations, being there from the start with a lot of those and getting it right. And I think this is where some organisations miss what they're trying to do in relation to sort of either trying to run before they can walk, going ahead at like 100 miles an hour, and it's almost like whoa, and like we've sort of like chatted about, and I sort of like before we sort of like cracked on and pressed record, is that sort of getting your organisation in shape, and that whole quality management system in relation to sort of like organisation. And with your experience, Lyndon, and where you've been on this journey, it'd be really good to get sort of like from you around sort of that experience that you've had working with organisations, and how key it is to having those strong foundations in relation to sort of like quality management, especially with with governance.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, it makes me think. So we see it as a journey, right? So it's not by accident that if you look at our website, there's lots of kind of people going on a journey. It's about your journey to compliance, and it's not a. I mean, if you're successful as one of these companies, it is a. I don't mean this to be pessimistic or down, but it is a never-ending journey, because if you're an early stage startup, you're going to need X, Y, Z to be able to execute your first contract. Then you'll grow a bit more, and then perhaps to be on a framework you'll need 27001 or 9001. You start kind of you get into the medical device territory. You need various ISO standards. All the way. We deal with we do serve startups. We don't have tons of them. We have lots of companies that are funded and are rapidly growing, but we also increasingly deal with large corporates, like large international corporates who are struggling to understand how to locally deal with either UK or European various what they see as local oddities, if you like. So even when you get to that stage, you're still on your journey. You're still needing to. It's not like you reached a destination, you got compliant, a stamp was given, end of chat. It's just not like that. And as companies scale, I mean, something that we've had to learn is we're up to about, we're not massive, we're up to about 20 employed people now. But, as your company scales, you have to deal with your internal governance. Even if you're not building health technology, you have to understand how to deal with your internal governance. I mean, quality management systems, you have to have systems to manage quality. I find it really well, you might be talking to a client, and you have a conversation about what we would just kind of call our QMS, and people straight away start thinking about an ISO compliant quality management system, and they, oh, I don't need one of those because I'm not this. And you're like, so hang on, you're building products, but you don't need a system to manage quality. So I would argue, and this is lessons hard learned really, but if you build correctly, and the word that you used is foundations, if you build correctly to start with, invest properly, and get your foundation layers in, everything that you build on top of that, with any luck, you won't have to tear down and start over from scratch. And it seems a very sensible and logical way of going at something. So, one of the early conversations that we have with our clients is, do you have a governance roadmap? Do you have a strategy? Where does it fit with your commercial strategy? And of course, these things change and these things evolve, and this doesn't stop companies innovating or even pivoting or whatever else. But at least with what's within your sphere of influence, you can get a good understanding of what sorts of things that you want to put in place. And it's important to us that when we're first talking with clients, how can I put this? You get a sense of whether you're going to be able to work together well, right? Because I'm a really strong believer in everybody wins. I think Adam and I can win as founders. Our team that work for us, they can win as people that work for the business. But I guess more than that, society can win because you're helping products get to market that mean something.
Totally.
Very, very clear that the future of healthcare is going to be digital, and it's going to be a lot more autonomous. I think the kind of cap in hand. Yeah. If you're a person that's properly waiting for the NHS to do it for you, you're in the safety net. Really, there's going to be much. Well, I hope there is much more on proactiveness. So we can win, our company can win, our clients can win, society can win, and patients can win, right? So that's the way I think it should go, and those are the businesses that we love to work with. And you all know that sometimes on occasion, you'll come across a business where it's like, I want to tick the box, make it go away. I'm not going to enact any of this. I'm just, we like to be quite honest with about that up front. We want to add value. We want to make sure products and services are safe to use. It doesn't need to cost the earth, but we won't shy away from having the difficult conversations, right? So it's important that we say to our clients, this is our view. You can take or leave our view. You can ask us to do what you need, whether it be on medical device or CSO or cybersec or whatever it may be. But this is our view. We're not telling you because we want to execute lots of contracts with you. We're telling you because that's the right thing to do. We're plenty busy, so we're not selling here. We're just telling you what's important. So, that's a good starting point. Is have you thought about? Have you had an honest conversation with your investors, your founders? Is everybody clear on the journey that we're embarking on here? And yes, it could be left turn, class 1, right turn, class 2, whatever it may be. And this is what it'll look like, not over the next 6 to 12 months, but this is what it'll look like over, the next 2, 3, 5 years.
Totally. And I think sometimes it's really difficult, isn't it? Like you've just said, I find in my experience is sometimes to get people to realise that it is a journey, it is a pathway, it's a regulatory pathway. It's not just a box ticking exercise in relation to I need to get on, the conversations around I need to get onto this framework. So please tick these boxes for me. And like you said, sometimes you get to know, don't you, Lyndon, sort of pretty much straight away, like some of those conversations, and you're like, I think you need to go to go and have a chat with someone else rather than sort of like, us in relation to that. But I think it's really good to embrace like those organisations that want to go onto that journey, and it can forge great relationships. And I think that learning experience as well is absolutely fantastic. Like, is absolutely key. in supporting organisations. Now, I know you do coaching as well, and it'd be really good to sort of like, have a chat with you and sort of learn more sort of like about that, because it's something that I've sort of now sort of like get into. As we mentor clinical safety officers, and I do sort of like coaching that, and I get a real buzz out of it. It's actually great, and it's a key part of what we do now is imparting that knowledge transfer and seeing people progress and grow, which is absolutely fantastic. So what got you into sort of like that whole coaching, please?
Well, so just to be clear, that's me personally. There isn't a coaching
Yeah. No,
governance.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, what I mean, but this is what we do all the time, isn't it? So when you're in A&E and you're working as a nurse practitioner or whatever it may be, I mean, all you're ever doing is teaching. I'm really difficult. Just going back to all that kind of nursing stuff, that this whole kind of novice to expert journey, if you like, and when you start doing it, it's exhausting because you're always thinking about every little thing that you're doing, and by the end of it, it nearly becomes an art. You kind of your pattern recognition becomes ridiculously good, and you're confronted by situations or patients, and before you know it, you're already starting to act. You'd have trouble perhaps articulating why you're acting. So I think, whether it be mentoring students, back in, that are coming through when we were working clinically, or imparting knowledge to somebody when you're managing them, or whatever else. I mean, difficult. It's only just recent. The difference between coaching and mentoring, I think, is particularly interesting.
Yeah.
I've been mentoring this chap on the NHS Clinical Entrepreneurs Program. And it's been great. I've really, really enjoyed working with him. Hi, Julie, by the way. But that's mentoring, because what I'm doing is, he's this like a really experienced anaesthetist, but what he's looking to get done is kind of essentially like registry work. He's looking to improve the emergency laparotomy pathways by collecting data, and then wanting to expand that across multi-sites. Now, the problems that he's largely confronted with are how to navigate the some of the harder corners of trying to get that stuff done in a complex, overstretched NHS. And what I'm imparting to him is stuff that I know. That led me really to kind of think about, well, what are the differences really between coaching and mentoring, and how do I put some more structure around that so I'm actually kind of properly useful, and I can differentiate and deliver these kind of things to people in some detail. And of course, coaching, you don't need to have any specific knowledge about the topic that you're coaching somebody with, because you're using structures and models to identify goals, and look at where people are on the continuum to achieving those goals, and what their will might look like to committing to getting those goals completed. Whereas mentoring nearly always has subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
And I really, really enjoy it. It reminds me, to a degree, I've got the space and time to do it because I've hired a really effective senior leadership team, which is odd because I feel slightly redundant in my own business sometimes. But it's actually about learning new skills rather than stepping into the bits that you can do, and if other people are better at kind of really good organization, which is not my strong point, then crack on. But it's what you do with that, I think is interesting. So I find myself in a quite privileged place where I can start thinking about how can I most usefully use the skills and knowledge that I have to help. Who is it that you choose to be supportive to? And it's the same feeling I had when I moved from commercial sales into training as a nurse. Of course, it's obvious where I would go with that is mentoring, coaching, because I definitely want to combine both. I think there's a lot of room to really kind of support people to come to their own understanding. And if it's in service to them, actually be like, actually, I have some experience. I'm literally going to put my mentor hat on, and in this situation, I might consider doing X, Y, Z. The obvious place for me to do that is with health technology founders and to a degree, clinical entrepreneurs. I'm also really interested in coaching people from outside that world. So people who are trying to get things done, whatever it may be. Maybe people that have some that need help. I guess stepping into what their skills really are, and particularly around kind of pattern recognition. I'm actually having a proper assessment for dyslexia in a few weeks' time, but my daughter's dyslexic. I know I will be a winner in that game. But the what I think is interesting about that world is there's a lot of pattern recognition in there. And a lot of business leaders I come across, a lot of entrepreneurs that you come across are dyslexic. So, I think it's an untapped skill, I think, of calling those things out for what they are, and then seeing them as a positive in business rather than, a deficit, if you like, that can be kind of supported.
It's great that you got the time in sort of like, because a lot of us, if you look at sort of like people that are sort of like got their own companies, their own organisations, etc. and stuff like that, haven't got time to sort of like to eat and sort of like do sort of like stuff like that, get a decent meal down them, let alone sort of like coaching and mentoring, stuff like that.
I think what's interesting with that, though, and we were talking about it just before we came on, wasn't it, is balance. I mean,
difficult.
Whilst I built Eightfold Governance, I don't mind saying I was working, it was all I ever thought about. I'd wake up on, and I'd limit myself to how much I did on a Saturday, and I'd make sure I took the Sunday off. But all I was thinking about really was, what is the offer? What do people want? How do I control the quality? How do we make sure we are what as best as we can at what we do? And I say that because I do have plenty to do at Eightfold for sure. I'm not kicking back, but what I'm trying to concentrate on now is some balance. I went on a wonderful leadership retreat recently at a place called Embercombe, and they were talking a lot about the twin path and this idea that there's what you do and there's what you do in the kind of real world, as in your job, and then there's looking after the kind of emotional, spiritual aspects of yourself. And and I literally locked one part of myself off to be able to build a company, and now I can bring some balance to that, I think, by making offers around coaching, mentoring, and making sure that I carve out some of that as pro bono. So no, that I can support the sorts of people that I want to support rather than just the people that can afford to pay for it. And that to the point of why we are called Eightfold and why we're about more than profit. It's what's in service to society, what's in service to the community. Is your offer authentic? So again, a conversation I often have with founders, because in the world of raising money, building companies, getting the governance done, all the different things that they have to do, it's so important not to lose sight of what you first set about doing. There's this lovely proverb, and I'd like to say it's really profound, but I think it's from Kung Fu Panda, and it and it says, if you plant a peach seed, you grow a peach tree. I think actually it came from somewhere older than that. But I really like that, because in all the businesses I've ever worked in or worked for or supported, you can't avoid it. The people that found them, what they're doing, they're modeling the businesses that they will turn into. So, if you plant slapdash, I don't care, get it done, I want to be a unicorn, guess what? You're going to grow that culture. And if you can anchor yourself to your purpose and about who you really are and stay authentic to the clinician that decided that they wanted to start a health tech company, it's hard not to lose sight of these things with all the pressures. But it's also really nice to bring people back to why you first started doing what you're doing, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think you have to stay grounded sometimes, and I think that's why sometimes we know we've chatted a lot over the years, and we sort of sing from the same hymn sheet in relation to that. And you got to know where you came from, haven't you? But you've also got to sort of like, to where you're going as well. Keep true to that journey. And I think after that message, Lyndon, be prepared. You might get inundated with requests for, for coaching and mentoring from the audience in relation to that. It's absolutely great hearing your story in relation to that, and it's good to be able to sort of like give back in with sort of like the experiences that you've got. But I'd like to come back and sort of like focusing around sort of that whole funding piece, market access for sort of startups, SMEs in relation to getting into the digital health market. It's highly competitive, as we know, and we're organisations, aren't we, that see this firsthand, don't we? Around sort of like, because we deal with sort of like with NHS, we deal with industry, we know about sort of that whole piece about startups. And some fantastic ideas that we see, Lyndon, aren't there? Like like you said previously, some of these people are coming to market with fantastic, great ideas and it's all about giving back, to the community, isn't it? It's like enabling care, enabling data in relation to that. But it's hard, and it can be really difficult, and
difficult.
where are those guys on that journey? I don't want to just sort of like concentrate on sort of like finding the funding for those startups, but the funding's just one part of it. It's like sort of
difficult.
What's your experiences in relation to sort of like the startup? So they've got funding. That's just the start of the journey, isn't it? In relation to that, and how hard is it for some of those when you're like as we know,
Difficult.
a two-person team, you've got this great idea, but then there's this big ask, isn't there? Well, you need a quality management system. You need sort of like all this regulatory compliance. You need all of this. You need all of that. And the list can be sort of like endless. And as we know, and I'd like to speak more about that like a bit later, is around we don't make it easy for people in the UK necessarily, with the likes of DTAC and all the things that are going on at the moment. So it'd be good to get sort of like your experience in relation to that.
Yeah, I think. I think you've got to be. I think the biggest, the first and most important point I would make is that you've got to be realistic. Because in the macro sense, certainly when we were much smaller, we spent a lot of time talking to people that 2-5-man bands, good idea, unfunded. Perhaps they didn't. But so where's that going to come from? And have you? It's very easy to kind of take your idea and play it through to its natural conclusion. But if you're going to do that, then you've also got to think about what does that natural conclusion mean in terms of regulatory. And you would have had these conversations. The relatively early stage startups, they've got a product roadmap. They're going to do X, Y, Z, and then they're going to do this. And what this is clearly going to be class 2. And the gap between here and there, people don't really they don't really understand the very large sums of money. Just being realistic, that going to there, and the time and what that involves. And so there's no shame in being realistic. And actually, if you're not realistic, the people that you want to give you money to execute your goals will know. There's no point going to see a VC or anybody else, or an investor, or going to a pitch event with something that isn't a realistic regulatory strategy, with some realistic timelines and some realistic numbers against it. And I guess, be brave. I think I would say to the early stage people, if you've got a good idea that really is a changer, and you've taken the time, you looked at the market, and you think it could be a winner and everything else, then write down the numbers, and have that aligned with your. I mean, a kind of governance strategy is not an expensive product, but it will give you the kind of roadmap that you need to start putting figures against, and which you can run alongside your commercial strategy. because you know, any VC or investor worth their salt, and they all are, you know, they're normally very clever people. They're going to ask you some questions. You're going to get exposed really quickly. So there's no point pretending. You just got to bite the bullet and own it. Yeah. Pause there. As this is
Yeah,
the world.
no, it's
Difficult.
sorry, I lost you a bit there.
Sorry, that's the world that you wanted to talk about. How do these companies
Yeah,
landscape?
absolutely, absolutely. And I'd I'd like that to sort of like lead on because you know we we work in this sphere and you know we are talking about regulation and I suppose we've spoken more around sort of you know quality management system, the organisation, which I wanted to do. I didn't want to sort of like us to sort of like you know to do necessarily a deep dive into other areas, but I am going to bring it back to clinical risk management sort of like now because I have to in that whole sort of like you know that the realm, which obviously you know Lyndon is my biggest passion
Yes.
in regulatory compliance and sort of like you know sitting on the special interest group and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
we both know that
Difficult.
DCB 0129, DCB 160 is up for review. We've you know some of us have actually been you know making a lot of noise around wanting this to happen for quite a while now, and you know it's very frustrating when you get even clients saying to you, "Oh, there's a 2018 date on these standards. What's happening with that?" And it's quite sort of not embarrassing, but you think sort of, well, you know, when you have to say, "Well, we don't actually know at the moment," but now we do. That you know, well, we know something um, around. There is going to be a consultation in relation to that, and DTAC, so the digital technology assessment criteria as well, is is up for review. Where would you? This is putting you on the spot here, Lyndon.
Well, that's fine.
Where would you like to see
Difficult.
these go, and what sort of direction? Because I know my thoughts on this, and we'll sort of like you know we'll chat about it. But what were your first impressions, Lyndon, in relation to this news, and sort of like you know what your I suppose what are your worries?
Well, I don't really have any worries as such.
Okay,
You know, I, I, we've got quite a broad portfolio, so you know, um, I think what you know, and not an insignificant part of it is around clinical safety services. I mean, my overall view, what I come back to, if I kind of come back to what's the purpose, right?
yeah,
That I would absolutely hate to be running a business that I didn't think added any value to our clients. I'm not sure I could do it. And there's I guess two things that kind of come out of that. I'm ceaselessly surprised how much value I think we add to our clients by acting as clinical safety officers to them. Um, and I think good companies understand that value. And so, well, I suppose it does tie into my other point. So the hypothesis that I had when I started the business is that we would be working with early stage startups and companies that had just taken their first rounds or had their first few million pounds in investment or whatever else. And my hypothesis when we started the business was when these companies would reach a certain scale, they would then take these services in-house, whether it be IG or clinical safety or cybersecurity or anything else. And I've been completely wrong about that. And the other assumption that I made on some of the CSO services was, you know, we would do the heavy lifting, i.e. we would write the DCBO 129 clinical safety case report and help implement a system. And then they would name one of their, you know, they'd send somebody on some training and then they would name one of their clinicians to act as a clinical safety officer. And on both those counts, I've been eternally proved wrong. And the thing that I really like about that is that when I've pressed founders about, you know, why is that? They've said it's added so much value to their process. So, and again, I won't name names, but there's one company that we work with that is around radiology, actually, which are one of the more vocal, some of the governing bodies, one of the detractors of DCP 129, if you like. So this particular client, they asked us to do just that. Please do DCP 129 implement for us, and then we'll take it on. And we finished it, and they said, you know what, we've learned so much about this. We've changed so much about the way that we develop our software. We've changed so much about the way that we test it. We want to keep you on. And then when I pushed them further and said, well, why do you want to keep us on? They said, because your clinical safety officers have got purview over, Brian's very particularly told me I'm not allowed to say how many clients that we work with, but we've got
difficult
because we work with so many different sorts of clients, from startup through to multinational corporate, multi-billion-dollar companies. We get to see a lot of what is done well, what's done badly, and all the rest of it. And I think the other beauty there is because we have the IG and the medical device and the cybersec and stuff in-house. I don't know if you know this concept, but it's like the T, that you have the breadth of knowledge. So we've got wide knowledge across many domains, and then we've got depth of knowledge with the CSOs and the medical device people, the cybersec people, and the IG people. And we're very careful to make those people interact in a variety of different ways so they can learn from one another, yet deliver very particularly in their role. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think it's a bloody good standard. I think quite. I mean, if I'm being trite about it, you could say that DTAC is a good idea, poorly implemented. I think there are more effective ways of implementing it.
Yeah, totally.
It's largely a collection of things that these companies should be doing anyway. Under a trolley, right? But I wouldn't like to see. I think a lot has been gained, and as a senior clinician and a senior manager that's dealt with a lot of serious untoward incidents and written a lot of reports about root cause analysis and what happened and why did it happen and all the rest of it, and the Swiss cheese model, these systems are complex, and quite often the systems that we're acting as clinical safety officers for, the applications or the services that we're acting as a clinical safety officer for are part of a wider system. And where you have those systems interacting, that's, I think, when you can introduce risk. And I think a lot of risk has been mitigated by having, and I think industry has done a lot of it, right? So we don't do an awful lot of 160 work on the NHS's side, because I struggle with understanding how we, how you can effectively control that risk as an outsider, whereas I think it's quite easy to control that risk with suppliers. But
difficult.
I think an awful lot of value has been added there, and I think that the suppliers have unfortunately been asked to do a lot of the heavy lifting. I suspect, or what I hope for the way that this teases out, is that there becomes a way. I mean, we tried to do it with our DTAC portal, but that how do you, when somebody has been looked at closely and given a big tick, how do you then make sure that loads of NHS organisations aren't wasting all of their money redoing what the system or the ICS or the hospital did down the road? That is kind of tricky, because a lot of the content of DTAC, and particularly the clinical safety documentation and the penetration testing and some of the code stuff, is live. So it's not like, here's your stamp, see you later. It's
difficult.
Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, you're not, Lyndon, and you're absolutely right in a lot of that. I mean, it's key to a team, and I know that message getting across, and it's the same with us as an organisation. It's that depth and breadth in relation to your teams, and it's knowing how they collaborate, how they interact, to add
difficult
to be effective in relation to delivery of those services is absolutely key, and a lot of people get that wrong. Has to be sustainable. See, we talk about this all the time within digital health, sustainability, scalability, and sustainability. Yet,
difficult.
NHS England, dare I say, and I'm going to mention sort of like, procurement's come out around tiger teams. I don't want to talk too much about it, and I don't want to get into corporate land and all that sort of stuff. However, as a principle, I think it's a good idea. However, lots of questions around. It's very reactive in what it's doing. It's not proactive. And if you want something that's going to be sustained and scalable and that's going to work, why don't you play your money into actually doing something like that instead of being reactive, putting a procurement out for a year and saying, oh, we're going to parachute people in when there's problems with EPR deployments. And it's like, no, it's just like, I'm just sitting out here. And and the annoying thing is that we get brought to that. Sorry, and I'm being disruptive now, but it's what I do. People know that. You know, independent sector. Me and you know, Lyndon, that the majority of the subject matter expertise within regulatory compliance in the independent sector. It's not in the NHS. It's not in NHSE. In relation to that, and a lot of the time we don't get brought to the party. Lots of things happen, decisions get made, etc., and stuff like that. When are we going to start working collaboratively, properly collaboratively? Because we've got AXREM, we've got ABHI, we've got those guys, and I know they're disrupting and they're asking questions about DCB. What's the worth of the DCBs and the role of the clinical safety officer, etc. Everyone's got their opinions. I'm not sort of like saying at the moment we need to see where that goes. But what are NHS England doing? They just seem to sort of like almost hide away in the shadows. I know there are some initiatives with BTAC that are happening, and we've both been involved in some of those conversations, and I hope that continues. But for me, it's not enough. And
Difficult.
I'm coming back to what you were saying about sort of like 129, 129, 160. Don't for anyone saying they are good standards, and DTAC is a great concept. But 129 doesn't it needs updating. We've had lots of things happening. What it needs tweaking. It needs refreshing in relation to. No one's saying principles, methodology, and all that. It's bang on. It is. And if you follow that, and like I always say, it's not rocket science, but you have to follow those principles. But we've got AI now. We've got mobile technologies. It's very weak on governance, etc., and stuff like that. So there is things that can be brought in, but if they're not going to embrace the independent sector, then it's going to be really frustrating, I think, for everyone. Because are we going to see proper changes in relation to the standards?
Difficult.
Yeah,
Sorry, I've had a bit of a moan there, but
no, so I think you're right. I mean, I know that a good few of us have put our hands up and via organisations like ABHI, and we've had conversations with NHS England. We'd love to help. I guess there are practical solutions to these things, and I think there are some questions.
Difficult.
But some of this feels like it's falling out of. If you're let's say, again, not naming names, but if you're a very large multinational with a huge product suite of Class 2 medical devices, and you're being asked to prove DTAC or DCB 129 on each, and it's worked
very frustrating.
Yeah, well, and these companies don't mind saying things like, we don't really want to come to England. And, if you're delivering that message to ministers at ministerial level, because these are the size,
absolutely,
they're going to pay attention. So there is something about, if this product is not changing, and it's been signed off and it's been through this rigorous approach, and there's billions of units distributed around the world, is there a different lane? I don't know. But these are the conversations that need to be had. I would say that if you're working in the world of innovation, and you're working in the world where you're trying to, as a supplier and designer of products, you are trying to keep moving and move relatively fast, and you're trying to move quickly but safely. I think clinical safety officers offer an awful lot. And actually, to that point, some of our European customers and Israeli customers and other customers around the world, that have that are
difficult.
working with our CSOs to be able to operate in the UK, they're importing that, they're embedding it in the rest of their business. So is there an argument that goes, well, is there something good here that can be that can be folded into an international standard, rather than, does the international standard mean that you've got to get rid of this? I don't know. But what I will say this, I really think that we've added a ton of value, and I think the standard and the CSOs, it's a really committed community, as you know, and it's by people like yourself and others. It's a really committed community that they know a lot, and they add a lot of value, and that's what is the thing adding value to your business. I think it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like, with initiatives like, we've seen, I think in the last 12 months, we've seen so many initiatives like the CSO Coffee and Chat by Kay Reynolds, which is like, we haven't seen anything like that before. The CSO community was very much, wasn't it? It can be a very lonely role sometimes for a lot of people, and I think we needed that glue. We needed that sort of like, that community, and I think that's been absolutely key to sort of like, and sort of doing things like this, like sort of like, getting people out there, because we need to, don't we? We don't talk about it enough, right? Or we didn't before. I don't think there was any sort of like, opportunity to do that. But it's like, we need to get it out there. We need to get people's stories out there as well, Lyndon, because, and I'm a big believer in that, because, if there's 10 people that listen to this episode of the podcast, and your story, your advice and your experiences, and go, blimey, I'm now going to do X, Y, and Z, or Lyndon's right, I'm going to look at this, or I'm going to like do that, job done. In relation to that, for me, a lot of it's all about raising awareness.
Cool.
Standards have been around, and I'm coming back to 129 and 160, but those standards have been around for like 15, 16 years now. And we're still, seeing like sort of, health organizations that are just like, almost at the start of that journey, manufacturers that are still asking questions around what are they, etc., and all that sort of stuff. And I think, we need to support the community in relation to that. And at the moment, unfortunately,
Difficult.
it's the independent community that are doing that more than the NHS. Again, that's me being disruptive, and I know it's sort of like, but I think things need to change in relation to that, and there needs to be more effort from that front.
I mean, I don't think this is controversial, but the thing that I think the NHS is very, very, very good at is frontline care, and it's good at delivering
it is.
When it's urgent, or it's emergency, LTC care, it's like different, whatever else. But I think, I mean, if the suppliers I think are really able to add something to this, and they're able to evidence it, and I don't see nearly as much as you do from the other side of the fence, again, because I worry about the ability to control the risks effectively. What I would say is that NHS organisations, A, they are not all the same. B, they're really, really complex. C, they're normally the chair of a hospital I used to work with described most of the systems as guano, which is the layers of bat or bird
or bird,
is layers and layers of workarounds. And the trouble is, if you're trying to implement systems where there are tons of workarounds, it gets quite complex. I just think, where the suppliers and their CSOs and their evidence and their instructions of how to implement can be helpful, I think do as much of that as possible. I worry sometimes that, and from managing health services myself, it's hard when you feel like you've got, difficult edge cases that you're trying to manage. And I know that clinical safety is not an edge case with software or anything else, but they could do with being able to focus on what they're good at focusing on. So I think putting the burden to a degree on suppliers to do the stuff that they kind of have to do to work internationally anyway. I'm kind of all right with that. But I hear what you're saying, that you know the NHS has got to decide how it's going to check the homework. Is that what you're saying? I think.
Yeah, it is in certain respect, but it's like you've just said, Lyndon. It's trying to cut through all that.
difficult.
You know, I'm gonna all that crap and sort of like apologies to the audience, but it's sort of like trying to cut through all of that, and I think
Difficult.
the NHS can learn a lot from industry in relation to, you know, and we've spoken about this throughout the episode, is that you know, quality management system. And I understand what you're saying about workarounds, etc., and trying to build a system on top of that. But it's the fundamentals in relation to that. I think they could learn a lot from process, and it's something that they just don't. Like, yeah, they don't do well. So in relation to that, so Lyndon, I think we could go on and on in relation to,
don't we?
and we do tend to, but it's been absolutely fantastic having you on, and I think we've sort of like, you know, we can chew the cud, can't we? And you know, thank you ever so much. What I want to do, and I do this with all of my guests, I'm putting you on the spot again in relation to this, is just one final thing. If there's one takeaway that you could give to the audience and to everyone listening in relation to that whole sort of like regulatory compliance and that sphere, and to round up what we've spoken about, what would that be?
I would say when you're working in startups. I've worked in health technology startup companies. You know, some things are within your sphere of influence, and some things are not. Governance and compliance is within your sphere of influence. Just sort it out, you know, and do it in a logical, planned way. You know, like developers run up a technical debt. You familiar with the term? The developers, they
Yeah, totally.
There's no need. It's the same with governance. Don't run up a debt that you're going to have to pay back at some time, because you will have to pay it back, and you don't want to have to try and pay it back when you're about to sign a massive contract and somebody says, "Show me the evidence," and you don't have it.
No, that's great. Absolutely, big believer in that. It's the old Boy Scout thing. Be prepared, isn't it? In relation to that.
You know what? Adam is actually a Scoutmaster and has been since.
I know. He's, yeah.
Wherever you go with him, he won't mind me saying, wherever you go with him, whatever you need, whether it be a cable, a sewing, a needle, whatever, he's got it. Produces this stuff out of his bag. It's like Mary Poppins, you know. Did you need
that? Yeah, perfect. No, that's great finishing on that. Lyndon, as always, mate, thank you ever so much. And to the audience out there who've been listening, thank you ever so much. You can find us on Spotify and YouTube at the links that are on the intro page, and come and subscribe to the sites. And on to episode 15, where we'll be speaking to Dr. Saif Abed, which will be another interesting episode. Lyndon, thanks again, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks for not making me episode 13, because it's unlucky for some.